The Battle of Winwaed. It's something of a local legend in this part of Leeds. In pubs, street names, housing estates, echoes of it can be found everywhere. In books and websites you'll read that it took place somewhere here, where I grew up, the areas known today as Seacroft and Winmore. I've talked about this battle a lot over the years. It always seems to come back to me. Now I've realised it's a much bigger story than we might think. Because it's not really about arguing over where it happened. What this is really about is how history works, how it intersects with folklore and identity. So join me as we explore the definitive story of the Battle of Winwaed. This is a time of warlords and legends, before England even existed. Dozens of independent kingdoms fought each other in brutal struggles for supremacy. Two of the most powerful were Northumbria and Mercia, covering what is now roughly the North and the Midlands respectively. By the middle of the 7th century, Northumbria had grown to cover vast swathes of northern England and southern Scotland. It was led by King Oswald, who had sent Aidan to found the monastery at Lindisfarne. A devout Christian, Oswald became a martyr when he was killed in battle by the pagan King Penda of Mercia in 642. His death at the hands of a pagan led many to see this conflict as a struggle between God and heathens, especially by the Christian chroniclers who would write about the events many years later. King Penda himself didn't mind Christianity. He allowed missionaries to operate freely in his kingdom. In fact, he was probably the type to convert if it became politically useful. But Penda grew ambitious, forming alliances with a number of Welsh kings. 13 years after defeating King Oswald, he set his sights on Northumbria once again. By then, Oswald's brother, Oswy, had succeeded to the throne. With a large force of Mercians and Welsh, in 655 Penda besieged Oswy in the northernmost part of his kingdom. Nobody knows exactly where this was, though it's often claimed to have been Stirling or Edinburgh. You'll find that a lack of certainty becomes a theme in this story. Our main source for these events is the Venerable Bede, who wrote them 75 years after they happened. He recorded that Oswy tried to buy peace with a large fortune, but Penda turned it down. But a different chronicler, Nennius, a Welsh monk from the 9th century, says something different. In his version, the night before the battle, Cadafael of Gwynedd took his share of the loot and returned to Wales, gaining the nickname Cadamedd, meaning battle shunner. I take Nennius's view. Penda must have had gold in order for Cadafael to take some. Penda had succeeded in his goals. He had humiliated Oswy and acquired a vast amount of treasure. But in a surprising turn, instead of staying down, Oswy got back up again, gathered his forces and pursued Penda. According to tradition, Oswy chased Penda all the way to Leeds, and somewhere here, in Seacroft and Winmore, Penda was defeated and killed. This was an almighty victory. Bede records Penda as having 30 legions, 3 times as many men as Oswy. But it had rained so heavily that the river Winwaed, believed to be the Cockbeck, had burst its banks, trapping Penda's forces, with many more men drowning than falling in battle. Bede and other writers viewed this victory as God's miraculous intervention. After the battle, Northumbria gained the upper hand and Mercia converted to Christianity. End of story, right? Well, actually, things get a bit more complicated than that. The main association between Winmore and Winwaed comes from toponymy, that is, place names. Winnan in Old English means battle, with wade meaning river. Hence, Winwaed is Battle River. Bede says that the war concluded in Leodis, Leeds. Winwaed, Winmore. So the case seems open and shut. But Andrew Breeze has challenged the traditional toponymy of Winwaed. He argued that the Wyn in Winwaed actually derives from the Welsh word Gwyn, meaning white and blessed. The languages spoken in Britain at the time were all closely related. When we consider the sheer number of place names in Britain containing the word Wyn, it's far likelier that they derive from Gwyn than all of them being connected to a battle. J.W. Walker traced the earliest known connection between Winwaed and Winmore to the historian Ralph Thoresby in 1715. Is this the origin of the story? Have all these local legends arisen because one person in the 18th century connected the two? Ralph Thoresby was a prominent figure, with a society in his name surviving to this day, so he may well have popularised the connection. But Bede said it happened in Leodis, I hear you say, and fair enough, that does narrow it down quite a bit. But I think we get distracted by the specific mention of Leodis. If you've ever talked to someone who isn't familiar with where you live, you might say that you live near the biggest city they've probably heard of. So you might live in Selby, but say that you live near York and Leeds. Considering that Bede was writing 70 years after the events and was himself not from the area, he might have been unfamiliar with the local area and so simply placed it at the nearest familiar location. When Sir Thomas Fairfax wrote his account of the Battle of Seacroft Moor in 1643, he didn't realise that there isn't actually a Seacroft Moor. He wasn't familiar with the local area, so he just made it up. And he'd fought in the battle. Let's have a look at the Cockbeck, the river in which Penda and hundreds of his men are supposed to have drowned. But it's tiny. It's difficult for me to imagine that this contained the raging torrents described by Bede. Granted, it might have changed size over time, and it was flooded, but even then, I can't imagine hundreds of men drowning, being swept away by this. So we've shown that the linguistic connection between Winwaed and Winmore isn't as strong as we first thought, and that the first written connection was in 1715. So what really happened? Let's examine some of the alternative theories offered. Penda was marching south. He had a large army, far bigger than Oswy's, and needed to travel quickly, so he used the ancient equivalent of motorways, the surviving Roman roads. When it reaches York, you're faced with two choices. Ermine Street leads southeast, crossing the Humber towards Lincoln. Roman Ridge goes southwest via Tadcaster and Castleford, both important Roman settlements. It's not easy getting a big army across a big river, especially when you're carrying a lot of treasure and someone's chasing you. You might remember how King John lost the crown jewels in the Wash. So Penda likely took the road known as Roman Ridge, leading into West Yorkshire. On that route, one of the rivers you cross is the Went. Back to J.W. Walker. In the 1940s, he identified the Went as the River Winwaed. His argument centres on Nostell Priory, which lies close to the river. When the priory was founded in 1121, the charter mentions a pool of St. Oswald. According to tradition, a hermitage had developed in the area and was discovered during the reign of Henry I, who gave them a charter to found the priory. The pool of St. Oswald mentioned in the charter shows that an association with the saint had existed for some time. Oswald was the brother of King Oswy and had been killed by Penda 13 years before Winwaed. Was the pool's dedication to Oswald a sign that the area held a deeper significance to the royal family? Walker argues that the battle took place near the priory, and that the River Went, recorded as Wennet in the 12th century, is the River Winwaed. This is echoed by Andrew Breeze, who places the battle near Wentbridge, a village which sits on the Roman Ridge Road and has a bridge crossing the Went. When we visited Wentbridge, however, we found that the river was little more than a flowing stream. Nevertheless, Breeze argues that a battle occurring over a river crossing explains Oswy's seemingly miraculous victory. His army was vastly outnumbered and would have stood no chance in a pitched battle on an open plain. But if Penda's army was caught trying to cross a narrow bridge, they could have easily been trapped in a bottleneck and cut down. There isn't a lot of other evidence to support this view, but I do find it interesting and worthy of a wider audience. However, let's bear in mind that these are Christian chroniclers writing about a Christian victory many years after it happened. They may have exaggerated things to make Oswy's victory all the more miraculous. So what do I believe? Well, I'd love to give you a detailed argument, but the sources and evidence is simply too limited. I don't think it happened where it's traditionally believed to, because I don't think the evidence supports that. I do find Breeze and Walker's arguments quite compelling, but again they suffer from a similar lack of evidence. But what this really shows is how history works. Sometimes we can't know what happened, and stories get repeated over time. Historians have been arguing over this battle for centuries. Frank Stenton, the prominent historian of early medieval England, once argued that Winwaed was connected to the burials at Sutton Hoo. Bede records that the brother of the King of Anglia had been killed at Winwaed, and Stenton suggested that Sutton Hoo served as a memorial. However, the subsequent discovery of artefacts dating from at least 25 years before the battle means that that can't be what happened. With so much of the local area here devoted to the story, it's obviously become quite meaningful for people. To be told that something you've believed as true for so long might not be is very difficult. This is why I've made this video, because even though I've spent years talking about this battle, I realised that it wasn't just an odd factoid people occasionally got wrong. It was deeply rooted in the popular consciousness. But by properly examining the evidence available, we get a better understanding of the limits of our knowledge. This period remains shrouded in myth and mystery. There is a final unexplained mystery. In Nennius's 9th century account, the battle is recorded as taking place in Gai Campi, Latin for the Field of Gai. Nobody knows where this is or what it means. The Annals of Wales, written in the 10th century, records the battle taking place in 656, a year after Bede's account, and Penda dying in 657. Exactly why Penda is described as dying a year after the battle is not explained, and nobody can explain Campus Gai either. It doesn't appear in any other source, so it might be a mistake, or it might be an alternative place name which we haven't found another example of. Either way, it's an interesting, unresolved part of this mystery which lingers on. If you like this video, why not subscribe and watch some of our previous ones? And why not send this video to people who might also be interested in the Battle of Winwaed?